Okay, Howard, I think that I left off with capital letter E, establishing the Federalist court system. While the Constitution allowed for the creation of the Supreme Court, it did not establish any specifics about the Supreme Court. While it did, laid out what its job description was supposed to be and what their powers were, there was no offices actually created. So in 1789, Congress passed the Judiciary Act, which created a working court system. And in this case, the Supreme Court was created with 5 associate justices and 1 chief justice. This is going to change in a few years because the way the Supreme Court works is that, first off, in present day, the Supreme Court gets to choose what cases they will hear. And then once they choose that case, they all sit in banc. That's a Latin term, E-N-B-A-N-C, en banc, which means all of the 9 justices that currently sit on our Supreme Court hear the case, and then they go back and they conference. And they take a vote, and those who, when a particular action is voted for, whether it's to grant the appeal or not grant the appeal, whoever wins the majority, they select one of the majority voters to write an opinion about why the action was taken by the court. So let's just say there's an appeal, and 5 justices agree to grant the appeal, and 4 justices don't. So one of the 5 justices will write an opinion called a majority opinion, and it tells why those 5 justices decided to grant the appeal. Then the other 4 justices they will choose one of their associates, and he or she will write a minority opinion which says why they felt they should not grant the appeal. So at the beginning of the court, there were 6 justices, which meant that when it came to a vote, there was the possibility of a tie, and there was no way of breaking a tie. The Supreme Court had allowed for the breaking of a tie in the Senate because the vice president could vote at times of a tie. But the Constitution had not created a way for the Supreme Court to break a tie, so this layout of the Supreme Court is going to change in a few years. John Jay was appointed as the first Chief Justice as a reward for his faithful service, and he was a good first Chief Justice. Under this act, Congress also established a federal 13 district courts. There was going to be a federal court in every state. And then they had 3 circuit courts of appeals. And the way the courts work in the United States is that you have a court of original jurisdiction. That's the court who hears a case for the first time. If one of the parties in that case is not satisfied with how their case went, they have the right of appeal. Now, when you file an appeal, it does not allow you to introduce new evidence. You have to file the appeal based on that your constitutional rights, the court procedure was somehow prejudiced against you. Those are the grounds that you have the ability to appeal on. So these 3 circuit courts of appeals were there to hear initial appeals before it got up to the Supreme Court. The other thing that the Congress did underneath George Washington was ratify the Bill of Rights. As you may recall from our study of the Constitution, there were several states who did not want to ratify the Constitution until the Bill of Rights was added to it, and that it would expressly communicate the rights granted to all United States citizens. The interesting thing here is that the original Bill of Rights were numbered 16. Congress only approved 12 of them in 1789, and when it went to the states to be created into amendments to be added to the Constitution, the states actually only ratified 10. So the citizens themselves took away 6 of those rights, which I have always found to be interesting. Another one of the problems that George Washington had at the time was fighting with the Indians on the frontier. The problem was, ever since before the Revolution, the citizens of the colonies had wanted to move west. The more and more people came into the colonies, the less land there was for people to use as farms, and so the best way they could was to continue to move westward. The problem is that obviously with the colonies establishing themselves, they had already usurped several Indian nations and forced them to move west. And there had already been created some existing treaties. Now, Indians looked at land as everybody could use the land. No one actually had the right to own the land. Whereas in Europe, every inch of land was owned. And typically in Europe, every inch of land was owned by a rich person, and a poor person was only allowed to work the land as being an employee of the rich person. And there was no middle class. There was no way of ever bettering your circumstance. The best you could hope for was that the lord or aristocrat that you worked for was a kind person and a generous person. So you have two conflicting cultures, one that believed in absolute land ownership and one that did not. So you have the Europeans or the colonials moving further west, and they're seeing the land and they're claiming it, and they're doing it in such a way as to ignore the treaties that the colonies had already created with the Indians. So this is going to create, obviously, the Indians are already upset with us. Now we're breaking even more promises. Land is being taken and not paid for. And so they're going to do the only thing they can do, and that is attack. And so we see an increase of attacks on the frontier. The other instigator is that the British were helping the Indians. Now, the British were never supposed to be there. They were supposed to have left after the Revolutionary War, but they had stayed to maintain their forts so they could keep with the fur trapping and keep up their business interests in North America. And of course, they still were a little salty because they had lost the Revolutionary War. And so they figured they would make life difficult for the former colonies, and they would encourage them. They would encourage the Indians to go ahead and attack. The federal government does send out emissaries, and they do try to reestablish peace, but the Indians are fed up. They're done. They don't believe us, and who would actually blame them for not believing us? We don't have a great track record of actually holding our word to them. And so eventually, in order to bring peace back to the frontier, the federal government sends Anthony, and I'm going to correct this because it's Anthony Wayne, not Anthony Wade, was sent to the Battle of Fallen Timbers, where he met and defeated the Indians. And in the resulting peace treaty from that battle, the American government paid the Indians for the land that was taken. So we do make it right, but obviously the relationship with the Indians remains to be broken in this case. Out of this, we have 3 new states that come, and Vermont is brought into the statehood in 1791. Kentucky is brought into statehood in 1792, and Tennessee is brought in. So now we've gone from a country of 13 states to a country of 16. So now we've had domestic problems, we've had, just growing pains underneath the Constitution, and now we're going to have issues on the foreign front. What's happening, obviously, again, you weren't here for the Revolutionary War chapter, but the French had been quite instrumental in helping us gain our independence from Great Britain. They had come in, given us supplies, they had lent us their navy, they had even lent us some of their military geniuses to help us fight. And in 1789, France enters its own revolution against its king, Louis XVI. Now, Louis XVI had made when he had offered the United States France's help in the Revolutionary War. He did it at a time where he did it at a time when France was not in a good financial position, and the people were starving, and yet the rich continued to live very well. And the way that French law was constructed, the aristocrats and the Catholic Church did not have to pay taxes. So everyone else, all the poor people basically, they were the ones who had to pay the taxes. They were the ones who had to support whatever the French government got into. And so you have thousands of people who are starving, and there is it continues to be an angry situation. And eventually the citizens of France, they storm a prison in Paris called the Bastille, and they open it up and they let everybody out, and then eventually they take Louis XVI and they capture his queen, Marie Antoinette, and they imprison them in the local Paris palace called the Tuileries. And at first it seemed like it was a great thing, and a lot of Americans supported the revolution, and they were excited for what France was going to do. In letter B, Lafayette was one of the aristocratic military geniuses that had been sent to us to help, and he had formed strong friendships here in the Americas, and he even sent a key from the Bastille to Washington as if to say, here's to our own revolution. However, in just 4 short years, the revolution goes very, very violent. And they decide that they're not happy with just having arrested their king, and they go ahead and they behead Louis XVI, and they also behead his wife, Marie Antoinette, and their children. And then that was not enough. They decided that they had to get rid of everyone who was rich. So that was, Catholic Church priests. That was also whole families, children and women were led to the guillotine to be beheaded because of just this utter hatred for rich people. The problem with this is that no real stable government was ever put into place after the king was dethroned, and they're going to continue to be very chaotic for the rest of the 1700s and going into the 1800s. And Britain, seeing this instability and not wanting it to come across to them, they went ahead and declared war on France as a way of trying to stop their revolution. Now, obviously, Britain was not going to come to us for help with regards to this war, but France did come to America and say, hey, we helped you in your American Revolution. I need you to help. We need you to help us in ours. However, Washington realized that we were not in a position, not with our army and not with our finances, to go through another revolution. And so he is going to declare a position of neutrality and saying, you know what, we're not. If it doesn't involve America, we are just not going to get involved in foreign wars. So, to back up a little bit, in 1778, we had signed a Treaty of Alliance, which basically said that we would be there for them and that we would have a strong trade with them. Thomas Jefferson, who would eventually be our third president, was strongly in favor of the French Revolution, and actually had no problems with the fact that it had turned bloody. He made statements of he didn't care how much blood had to be spilled in order for France to have its freedom. But Washington, being much wiser than Thomas Jefferson being a bit of a hothead, had declared the Proclamation of Neutrality in April 22nd of 1793. I'm going to stop the video there and pick up with number 3 in the next one.